good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for this exciting panel on massive infrastructure opportunity through shared value. I am joined today by three esteemed speakers. Esther, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer of City Developments Limited. She's an active advocate for green building and sustainability for over 2 decades, and she was conferred the 2018 SDG Pioneer for Green Infrastructure and a Low Carbon Economy by the UN Global Compact. I also have Hardik with us this morning. Hardik leads the ESG practice at GMO and is responsible for building GMO's ESG capability across investment product areas and asset classes. Finally, I also have Kristian. Kristian is the Chief Investment Officer at Cbus Superfund. His team is responsible for designing, setting, and implementing the investment strategy for the fund. And I am Wai Leong. I will be your moderator for today. I'm from Klareco and I lead the public affairs function. We are going to talk about a very broad topic today. So before I pass on the time to our speakers, let me attempt to set the premise for the discussion so that you get a sense of where we are heading with today's topic. As we all know, infrastructure lies at the heart of efforts to meet the sustainable development goals. For a region as diverse and large as Asia Pacific, opportunities for infrastructure development vary considerably across different countries. Developing countries in the region would need to scale up investments to improve connectivity and access to essential services such as energy and transport, whereas more developed countries are stepping up on building smart cities and sustainable buildings for the future. So I think it's very important to keep in mind when we think about infrastructure, it's not just about big projects, right? It's also about the buildings that make up the infrastructure itself. We all know about the growing concerns over climate change that have highlighted the need for additional investments in disaster resilient infrastructure and buildings, and it has also spurred governments and investors into action. Governments have set goals for creating net zero economies, and terms such as ESG, sustainability, and resilience are becoming buzzwords today. So I think for this panel discussion, we will discuss broadly 2 areas, right? At the end of the day, when we talk about investment opportunities, where are the investment opportunities for infrastructure? And the second part of it is how do shared values or this idea of shared values drive these investment decisions? And I think our panel speakers are very well positioned to share with you their thoughts on the topic today. I shall pass on the time to Esther, and maybe Esther can take us through what do you feel about this.
Yes. Hi, good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me. Well, I think definitely the intro, set a very good foundation for discussion. And is our world sustainable? And I think definitely the last couple of years has taught us that, the health of our planet is not very good, and which is also interdependent and interconnected with the health of people and the economy and businesses and all that. And in the past almost half a century, more than 50 years, that business leaders in the market-based economy and has been trained to, focus on one core ideology, that is business of business is about business, about making, about maintaining profitability. But I think in recent year, sustainability, ESG, all this have exploded into the mainstream. So now today, what we are looking at is business of business is no longer just about short-term profits, and we have to look at the good old triple bottom line, which I really am a fan of it. We look at the planet, we look at the people, and without healthy planet, without healthy people, there won't be a market for business to thrive. And I think at the center of it, there is actually purpose that we are looking at, and SDG is actually at the core of this, making creating a more balanced triple bottom line. And of course, UN SDG is a very, it's an ideal that, that call for actions to build a cleaner, greener, inclusive, and sustainable world for people, planets to prosper together. And I think it's set really, really clear 17 goals, 169 targets that then actually is a common language that connect the world. to how to really proceed when you talk about, clean energy, when you talk about gender equality. What are the targets that you can really refer to? And whether you are in the West, East, any part of the world, we are sharing this common 17 goals and 169 targets. And of course, the question of how we can integrate it into our business effectively to add value, through our brand, our product, our services, and also, through the whole value chain, and contributes to a, more sustainable planet, and therefore also benefits the community. And I always say that being part of the ASEAN region, there are a lot of opportunities for applying or investing into SDG. And in fact, SDG help a lot to address the current global risk. And I'm sure that some of you have followed the World Economic Forum's annual global risk report. In January this year, among the top 10 global risks, based on the severity and also likelihood, 5 are actually climate related. Number 1 is climate action failure. Number 2 is extreme weather condition. And number 3 is biodiversity loss. In the last year, infectious disease became number 1, because of the global pandemic. And this year, it is still among top 10. It's ranked number 6 now. So we can see that climate is really, pushing up in the global risk, and everybody is hearing loud and clear IPCC's report one after another. The code red for humanity, and then the latest warning that the windows for human intervention is closing if we don't hurry up. The no amount of human intervention can really turn back the clock and also save the world from rapid global warming. So in the building sector, we are accounting for about 40% of global greenhouse gas emission, connected mainly to energy consumption and all. So definitely we know that we are in the position to drive change, and we also have a very big value chain and a captive audience. Whether you are in the building sector, you live, work, and also use building, and how you use buildings, can also impact on the, carbon footprint. And in fact, research shows that people spend about 90% indoor, whether it's at your office or at home or, at entertainment places and all that. So how do you, how do humans behave? How do you, conserve the energy, water resources, and how do you reduce waste and energy consumption will make a big difference, contributing to a sustainable future. So, I think I would just stop at this point first, and I will elaborate a little bit more on how and what we should do. And of course, last but not least, Race to Zero is really something that connects the world, because at Glasgow, everywhere you turn, you can see Race to Zero. And in fact, last year, CDL also pledged to commit to net zero with a very specific goals and a scope. So, which I will elaborate a little bit more. And thank you again.
Thank you, Esther. We'll definitely come back to you just to hear a bit of your experience and CDL's experience in the Race to Zero. But before we get to that, maybe let me get Hardik into the picture as well. Hardik, what is your take on today's topic?
Sure. Thanks, Wai Leong, and good morning, everyone. So as an asset manager, GMO has this kind of a philosophical belief that long-term valuation-based approach will maximize risk-adjusted returns. So given that ESG investing or considering sustainable issues into the way we invest kind of naturally fits into our investment process. So just maybe before I go on to make more comments, just to clarify, at GMO, we are primarily investing in the secondary market, so listed equities, listed bonds, and so on. And therefore, my comments on this panel will kind of be from that particular perspective. Now, when you think about shared values, so let me spend a minute on shared values itself. The way I interpret this is you want to pursue your financial goals, so you want to still make returns, but in a way that this kind of also yields some sort of environmental or societal benefit. So you're not trying to harm the environment or the society in your pursuit for financial success in some ways. It is definitely a lot about collaboration. So collaboration between, let's say, governments, NGOs, companies themselves, and let's say the broader society at large. But I mean, as we'll kind of discuss more during the panel, I think it's easier said than done. I'd like to spend maybe a couple of minutes on the topic of global warming and climate change. That's kind of very close to our heart at GMO. So GMO's co-founder, Jeremy Grantham, who himself is a global advocate for climate change efforts, he said a few years back that global warming is going to be the most important investment issue for the foreseeable future. And I think we totally believe in that. I think the severity that climate change now poses for companies, let's say in terms of financial risks, right? So companies that are not prepared to manage the impacts of climate change. You talk about erratic weather patterns, you talk about maybe changing regulations as well as business models, which will have significant impact on companies' the ability to succeed and sustainably succeed in the future. I think this is something that's kind of a reality of today and not something that maybe our children or grandchildren will have to worry about. The other thing what you've seen, especially around the COP26 last year and since then, there's a flurry of companies as well as investors setting net zero targets, right? So when you're seeing this transition towards the net zero economy, you'll see a lot of investment opportunities also come in. So a lot of times when you talk about climate change, people talk about risk, but at GMO, we also believe there are a lot of investment opportunities because of this transition. And I mean, there'll be, I would say, disruptions in old industries, new industries could come up. And to give you some few examples, like you'll need large scale investments in, say, building renewable energy, not only energy generation technologies, but also transmission infrastructure. You talk about smart grids, like Esther was saying, energy efficient buildings and transportation. And these are the things which are really important to not only survive but thrive in a low carbon future. So like at GMO, for example, almost 5 years back now, we launched a climate change strategy to kind of invest primarily in equities of companies that help mitigate, let's say, long-term effects of climate change, help adapt to them, or also improve efficiency of resource consumption. Because I think resource consumption is another area which is sometimes neglected. I mean, you were operating in a more challenging environment to, let's say, grow crops, for example, but you're also dealing with a growing population, and these kind of things are always difficult. So I think in closing, what I would say is like by supporting companies that are acting to adapt or let's say help the world transition to a green future, or maybe engaging existing companies that you hold to kind of go in that direction, I think we as investors can help shift the world's economy towards a more sustainable part. And I think that's something that maybe I'll throw a little bit more light in the later part of the discussion, but I'll stop here.
All right, thank you very much, Hardik. And finally, with Kristian. Kristian, what is your take on this topic?
It's probably worthwhile just giving a little bit of background on the nature of our pension fund and our membership. So Cbus is open to all Australians, but it has a particular focus on members that work within the construction and building industry. And because of that, there's a strong desire by those members to see their investments invested sort of within their own industry as part of a broader portfolio, with a view to actually create high quality jobs for themselves, but also strong retirement outcomes. So as a consequence of that, our portfolio has some particular features around the infrastructure and property space, which really resonate with their members. But also we have to align the way that we own and develop those assets in a way that also is consistent with what our members would like. So we have a property development company, Cbus Property. It's been running for quite a few years. It's highly successful, one of our strongest performing entities. And one of the challenges in the property industry is that often you get instances where workforces are contracted, you may not necessarily get paid appropriately, safety is an issue. And so the challenge of being able to invest our members' money in a way that actually generates strong returns, but also make sure that we're not cutting corners, was one that we leaned into pretty early. What we found was that the best place to do that was in the actual premium product place. So a lot of our portfolio is in the very high premium grade properties, and in Australia, the Australian governments and some of the large corporates were one of the earliest ones to demand minimum sustainability standards as part of being anchor tenants. So this created a really interesting opportunity where we could basically do good, put together a portfolio that was highly sustainable, but actually make money because that's what the market was, and make sure that we do it in a way where the workforce and participants are also paid. So it's a sort of magic pudding that works really well. We took some of the learnings from that. So our property portfolio is one of the most sustainable and highest rated for under GRESB globally. And because of that, we sort of saw that's where the market was. So this trend of, I noticed there was a question about sort of price on carbon. If you've got your consumers demanding the product and you're able to meet the product, and I think this is a growing trend. Consumers are much more aware of the organisations they deal with, and that includes also the asset owners as well. And so we had this view very early on. It was 2019 that when we're thinking about carbon footprint, that we had quite a high confidence that we could make a commitment to have a net zero property portfolio, and we could do it faster. So it was mentioned before, property has been sort of seen to make a contribution to greenhouse gas emissions of 40%. So as the owner of those properties and the way you design them and the way that you source the energy, if you can actually drive the operations of those properties to net zero earlier, then by virtue of that, you are actually assisting in creating the demand and also creating that transition. So we made that pledge. With our own property, we're probably likely, once you make that pledge, you've got to work out how you do it. But that focus is really important. And so, there's lots of initiatives you can do. You can actually, because you own a lot of properties, you can go out and do a mass tender for the energy. You can actually, again, improve return outcomes because you're bulk buying, but also create a market to stimulate further renewable energy. You have a stronger focus on efficiency. You take those learnings, you bring it into the operations of other buildings. And so even with established buildings, we're able to lift the sustainability ratings. And so certainly for the portfolio that we directly own, we think we're going to achieve that outcome very early, so in the next year or so. And as an owner, we're also able to have influence on our fund managers to set similar targets. On the infrastructure side, it's a bit of a more broader base type of portfolio, but again, we took the learnings from that and also, looked at what the consumers were expecting of, the assets or the services that were, because effectively infrastructure is a physical asset that provides a community service, and took the same approach around thinking about that portfolio. And again, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit there as well. So this, I think it's really important to think about infrastructure, not just about, the things that you touch, but actually what communities use it for. So it's not just a physical thing, but it's actually a service that we provide. And then how you provide that service and how you line it up with the customers starts to create that connection around longer term returns. And so, one of the features of infrastructure in some cases is it's regulated. So there's often a mechanism where an authority will look at what you do, look at your cost of capital and determine how much profit you can make. And again, if you can actually demonstrate that by investing money in a particular way, you're going to create either a better service or more resilience, then you're going to get a regulatory outcome that's favourable, which then goes to creating jobs in terms of what you might be doing to create efficiencies. But more importantly, or just as importantly, I suppose, from the asset owner's point of view, you're able to create returns as well. So it's not always possible to do sustainability and not have some impact on returns. But the more we look at it, we actually find a lot of commonality between managing an asset well and with a view to longer term outcomes, and actually getting recognised and rewarded from that from a return point of view.
All right, thanks, Kristian. I think there are a lot of good points that you mentioned there. I think before I follow up on some of the things that our speakers have shared, I would also encourage our audience to be part of the conversation too. So if you've got any questions, please feel free to drop it in the comment section or the Q&A section, and then we will get our speakers to take on some of the questions as well. But before we go into the comments section and the questions from the crowd, maybe as a moderator, I will exercise my right to ask the first question. There is something in common that all three of you have touched on, right? I mean, Esther talked about integrating, all these values as well as SDG goals into the value chain. Hardik, you mentioned about, supporting companies to be on the same journey as well. And I think, Kristian, you also spent a fair bit of time talking about, standards that we have set in guiding your investments and getting, property builders and owners to be on the same standard as part of the criteria to be collaborating together, right? Do you find that, this journey of getting your partners on board have changed over time? Has it become easier now that, ESG and all those things on net zero and sustainability are becoming the buzzwords? Or do you see that, for Asia Pacific, such a diverse region, there are still significant challenges in that regard? Maybe it would be good to hear your views on that.
Yeah, maybe I can start off, and Esther and Kristian can join in. So I think given my experience even before GMO, I used to work for Sustainalytics, which was more an ESG research house. So we have been engaging with companies and especially in the APAC region for a number of years now. So I think if you talk about 5-7 years back, there were more questions around, why are you asking me this? Why should I report on this? Why is this important? Let me focus on my business. A lot of that, I think, has gone for the large part. So now the dialogue is more constructive. So if an investor, like as an investor, we go to a company and say, maybe we are concerned about your sustainable impact on XYZ things, the dialogue is more, okay, how can we kind of learn from others' best practices? Can you kind of guide us? What exactly are your goals, etc.? And again, I'm not saying things will change overnight, but it's no longer like go away, let me do my business kind of a discussion. It's more collaborative. They're more open to understand and hear investor and other stakeholder concerns. I think that to me is one of the biggest changes. And I mean, to credit like that happening is obviously not just investors, regulators, and I think also in general the society at large has become more aware of these issues. If you talk about Asia Pac, and maybe we can drill into it a little bit later, but Asia Pac is also disproportionately impacted by some of the ill effects of mismanaging these things. So think about climate change, rising sea levels, global warming. I mean, APAC is kind of people like you and me are actually seeing things change in our day-to-day lives now. So people are, I think, more open to it than maybe a few years back. So I'll pause there.
Esther, Kristian, any thoughts?
Well, certainly, I think over the past few years, we really witnessed that the financial sector is actually playing a very, very major role to, accelerate action. And of course, in 2019, we hear very loud and clear that the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance was formed, and investors have already been, giving, pressure, whether it's the largest, asset owner, or, almost everyone is setting, giving a very clear signal that they will screen investee company like us, based on ESG factors as well, apart from all the other financials as a consideration. So I think that was actually 2019, and then last year, prior to COP, in July, Net Zero Insurance Alliance was formed. And this played a very important role for, building owners, and because the insurance premiums may get so high, or some building which is subject to very, very high climate threats may not be even insurable. So there's also issues about stranded assets and also about the financial impact. If the premiums go sky high, what is the likely impact, you see? And then during COP, there was also the Net Zero Banking Alliance was formed. And also, last but not least, is actually the Global Financial Alliance for Net Zero, which comprises the leading stock exchanges, security investment firm, and service provider. So all these are pointing to the same direction, that ESG is really exploded into the mainstream when bankers, insurers, and investors are making decisions. So that actually connect and impact any businesses, whether you're in the East or West, whether you're in the developed nation or developing nations. And of course, when we talk about SDG, and the targets is basically, is very, very fundamentally at helping the developing nation. And as we all know that, ASEAN, is account for about, the third largest population and has been undergoing very, very fast urbanization. There's a lot of opportunity for growth. And back to the infrastructure and the building sector, I mean, with fast growing population, you need better infrastructure, better building, especially when you are talking about the younger generation. ASEAN has about more than 60% of populations are relatively young, 35 and below. So these are the, populations that will aspire for, more sustainable products and buildings, and even career that they will really want to join companies that show stronger commitments to, protect the environment and all that. So setting net zero is now almost a norm rather than something that it is really novelty. And based on the latest data of Race to Zero by UNFCCC, the participating cities and organizations, including businesses, investors, and all, represent about 90% of global GDP. And these are the really movers and shakers that will really expand the commitment and also help to promote the convergence of, commitments to a low carbon future. Yeah, I'll stop at this first. Yeah.
Kristian, any thoughts?
No, there's another question there that I'm sorry. I've been sitting in the room too. This is the efficiency in the building because it switches the light off if you're not.
Yeah, I understand.
There's another great question there, so I'm happy to, if you want to move to that one, I'm happy to give some thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Okay, sure. So I think we have a question from the audience who is asking, if the overall system shifts to one where the polluter pays, does that shift investment to only perform well if it is sustainable? I think that's a great question, right? I think at the end of the day, when we are talking about, cost, the question always lies in who pays, right? So it will be great to hear, maybe starting from Kristian, what are your thoughts on this?
So coming from Australia, there are some political challenges around getting alignment on things like making polluters pay. Certainly, one of the challenges we have is that the polluters are the ones that are causing some of the longer term damage, and good mechanisms would be price on carbon, for instance, so that would accelerate it. Now there are some proxies for that, but even in the absence of that, what we're finding is that there is a consumer demand for moving things in that direction. But more importantly, there are technologies and advances that are going on that are basically disrupting polluting technologies, polluting activities as well. So I think if we did move to a system where the polluters, and there was a proper price on that, and it was agreed globally, I would guarantee it would accelerate the change. However, even despite that, other policy levers, so regulatory levers, where you're phasing out, for instance, the sale of internal combustion engines, and therefore, from an infrastructure point of view, the customer demand in terms of the services that you provide changes. So other mechanisms to require a change can also have an effect, but certainly I think regulation and pricing combined would be the most effective way of really shifting investment faster. But it is really pleasing to see a growing momentum anyway, even in the absence of that probably desirable universal price on carbon.
Thanks, Kristian. Esther, Hardik, anything that you want to add on?
Well, we own a lot of buildings and also built buildings. So how we design, how we build, and how we manage building make a huge difference on the performance. And if I just quote Singapore's example, we are next to the equator. It's hot throughout the year. Okay, so how do we cool the internal space is really always a top priority. And as a builder, from starting from drawing board, can really already reduce heat gain by even up to 20% using today's technology, using AI, using digital simulations. How do we design on the orientations to maximize wind flow right from the beginning? That will already help. And of course, Singapore being a land scarce city, solar plant is really quite challenging for us. And even according to the UN standard, Singapore is considered as renewable energies challenge country. We don't really, it's not quite conducive at all for like wind or hydro, but really now it's like solar is still the most, conducive renewable energy we are tapping on. And just now, Kristian mentioned about regulations. Yes, it does really can drive change overnight. And in fact, in just 1 month ago, less than 1 month ago, it's actually Singapore has pledged to net zero by or around 2050. And it has also announced a very aggressive carbon tax, and currently it's $5 per ton. And by 2024, it will be $25, 5 times increase. And what I would like to highlight is actually Singapore, although being a small country, we are very aggressive in this carbon tax scheme. Now we account for one of the highest in the world, covering 80% of Singapore's total greenhouse gas emission, and from about 50 facilities from the manufacturing and the power, waste, and water sectors. So this is, very clear signal that everyone along the value chain, whether you are the key polluters or not, you will be affected, not in the mid or long term especially. Most businesses buy from the grid. So the price will be affected. The grid price will be affected if the Genco are the ones who's going to charge a very high carbon tax. Every business, even individual, will be affected. So carbon tax is really one very, very strong signal, and also a driver for change towards decarbonization.
Thanks, Esther. Hardik, anything else to add?
Just maybe a couple of quick points. So I think it's important to kind of note Esther's point there, right? So it's not the linkage between the polluter paying and the end consumer is not totally kind of disconnected, right? So if you expect a company to pay more for maybe offering you more sustainable options, you could indirectly expect yourself to also pay more for those products. I think it also is quite interlinked. I believe, and I think Kristian also alluded to this, the demand from the consumers will kind of shape a lot of these things in the future. So even if there is no carbon tax in, let's say, in a developing country, people might want to switch to more sustainable products if you're talking about power or even other products that the consumers use. So that's, I think, going to be an important point. And we as investors, even though, we're already right now factoring in potential carbon impact or carbon cost for companies. So even if they are right now not operating in a jurisdiction that has a carbon tax, we in some cases kind of model in maybe what happens if the tax comes in 3 or 5 years down the line, and how will that impact the company's financials. So those kind of things are already being factored in by investors, and naturally if you have more costs and at the same revenues, you'll make less profit and you'll be less attractive as an investment proposition. So I think it's all interlinked, but I think we shouldn't in some ways fool ourselves in thinking that all the costs can be absorbed by companies themselves without the end consumer having any impact.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think that's echoed by both Esther as well as Hardik. Maybe we'll move on to another question posed by the audience. So someone from the crowd asked about too much money chasing available investment opportunities. I think you mentioned, he means one of the panel speakers mentioned a return of 100 trillion being needed to reward the total sum invested. How does this figure compare to the size of the economy if it is looked at over, say, the last 100 years? What is your take on that? Maybe I would go with Hardik. Do you have any thoughts on this particular question on looking at returns and how it measures across time?
Sure. So yeah, I think the too much money chasing too few opportunities thing is real. So there have been a handful of companies, let's say like city developments, for example, who've been doing sustainable business for a long time. So initially when investors started looking at which companies should I use to build sustainable portfolios, you typically say, okay, let's pick the AAA or AA rated companies from an ESG perspective. And that kind of has been the case historically. But I think things are changing now, because you see many companies, as I was telling earlier, like kind of be open to this idea, be more transparent, be more communicating with their investors and all stakeholders. So I don't see this as a long-term problem. It's probably more like initially, obviously, the leaders kind of get more benefit and then everyone else kind of catches up. So I don't see this as a long-term systemic issue. In fact, if you have too much money chasing certain opportunities, so let's say everybody from countries to companies is setting net zero targets, that means there'll be more investments in clean tech, there'll be more investments in, let's say, batteries and storage and those kind of solutions. You would actually naturally have more innovation in that space. And that's essentially what we need, right? I mean, we don't have all the solutions for us to limit global warming as of today, but with enough kind of incentive, I think you would expect humanity to actually innovate and come up with newer solutions that will get us there.
Thanks, Hardik. Kristian, do you have anything that you would like to add?
Yeah, I think certainly we've sort of looked at this aspect, and there are some types of investments that you can see large amounts of money flowing to. So probably the most obvious places are the renewable energy spaces. So sometimes that's okay because it's underpinned by good contracts, and so the risk is low, return is lower. That's okay. My thinking though is that for instance, we own a $50 billion portfolio, right? So we already have existing assets. Now, if we were to influence the assets that we own to change the way they operate, to think about sort of some of the choices, capital choices. So with buildings, you don't build them and just let them sit for 40 years and do nothing. They do have refurb cycles. Infrastructure needs to be maintained, and so the choices you make around at a particular point in time, do you extend the life of an old technology, or do you actually look at that point in time to invest in something new or to improve efficiency? So if you own an airport, if you can actually invest in technology that will allow planes to be on the ground for less, it's a greater outcome for the people that are flying, but actually reduces the fuel use, for instance. So I think the opportunity is much wider. So if you have a mindset, a holistic mindset, then you can actually create returns from that opportunity. It may not be directly in the space that's highly competed, but you might actually be able to take advantage of the fact that some of those things are cheaper, and therefore they become a much better alternative than actually doing things the old way.
Could I jump in here that actually, investing in green and decarbonization is actually, is really a much stronger business case than ever. And we are not just looking at mitigation, but we actually should look at adaptation. So mitigation can really help us to save, a few $1 million in terms of grid price and all that. These are already proven. But what we are looking at is the bigger, outcome, bigger impact. So we have actually conducted climate change scenario planning and tried to look at the what are the likely financial impact from physical and also transition risks. And one of our key pillars that underpin our ESG strategy is actually digitalization and innovation. And the aim is really to decarbonize. That is our, very top priority, decarbonization through digitalization and innovation. And last but not least, you must actually track and disclose your impact as well. So what get measured, get managed, if you don't really track, you don't really know where are the the points that you need to invest in and to achieve the outcome and the ROI that you wish to achieve. And of course, when after we finished the second climate scenario planning, it was in late 2020. And in fact, we are not just looking at the traditional so-called climate risk, we are also looking at climate-related risks such as the pandemic, which caused a lot of disruption. So we are now in the third climate change scenario planning, looking at the bigger scope and also looking at the disruption caused by unprecedented, pandemic or climate-related, risks. So we are really living in a very, very dynamic and challenging world that, now we are not talking just about climate and also health risks, but, the war suddenly, just, affect almost, also the sentiment and investment sentiment, and also, apart from really causing a lot of disruption and uncertainty and discomfort, definitely, we need to drive change. We also look at, a much bigger picture. The whole world is connected. Whatever happened in the north will affect the south and will affect the tropics. So we need to look at sustainability in a very holistic manner. Yeah.
Thanks, Esther. We probably have time for one more question. So from the crowd, if you have any last question that you would like to ask, please feel free to drop it into the comment box. But I think just picking up on what we have been discussing so far, right? Sustainability. When companies promote themselves as being sustainable and green, there is always this risk of greenwashing too, right? And as more companies feel the pressure to be sustainable and green, how do we guard against, this potential threat of greenwashing?
Yeah, maybe I can kick it off. This is a topic that's been on our radar for a number of years now. So yeah, I would say greenwashing is more of a rarity in today's world than maybe even 3 or 4 years back. Given regulations have improved, there is more oversight on companies as well as investors. There is, I think the average investor has become more smarter and more demanding. So just because someone is saying, "Oh, we care for the environment," we don't assume that company is actually doing something. We would probably want to ask more detailed questions and kind of see impacts. So I wouldn't say greenwashing, at least from the corporate disclosure side, is let's say that big a concern today than maybe even 3 or 4 years back. Unfortunately, because of this huge demand for, let's say, ESG linked investment products, there is actually some degree of greenwashing on the investment product side. So funds actually calling themselves green or sustainable or ESG or any sort of a label, but not doing significantly anything different than they were doing yesterday. So I think that is something that's kind of the hot topic in the ESG space nowadays, and you have both regulators but also institutes like the CFA Institute and trying to kind of bring about standardized disclosures for then the end consumer to figure out what exactly am I investing my money into, right? Just because the fund is called green doesn't mean is it 100% green, 30% green? What exactly am I putting my money towards? I think that's another area that's going to be in focus for the next few years.
I
If
might add.
yeah. Okay, sure.
Sorry, I'll just add quickly.
Go ahead, yeah.
There are taxonomy frameworks that are being developed globally. I think Europe is quite ahead, and it's like it's like your food labeling, right? So you can actually be much more precise around what parts of your investments are contributing to the reduction, what parts are genuinely transition but will need to actually also reduce over time to maintain their status, and what parts are considered potentially at risk of being stranded. So those frameworks are done in different regions. In Australia, we're also I'm involved in a group that's starting to look at that from a financial services point of view, and I know similar taxonomy frameworks have been sort of developed in other regions as well. So I think it is really important that there is integrity around sort of what we say, and certainly I see those things continuing to evolve to really force demonstration of actual results.
Yeah, if I can just share quickly from the reporters and the corporate perspective, sustainability reporting, the ESG disclosures are getting very, very robust nowadays. And of course, Hardik talked about the harmonization, the standards and all that. And when we first started published the first dedicated sustainability report using GRI in 2008, of course, not many people are reading our report or looking at it. So this year we are producing our 15th report already, and we have actually blended the various framework, and we started with UNGC, the 10 principle, and expanded to SDG, and then we adopted GRI since 2008, and then SASB and CDSB as well. And of course, we look at science-based target. When we want to talk about, a companies who want to set a net zero targets, it's a very easy, ways to assess whether it is something that is very specific. And that's why we actually adopted the World Green Building Council framework, and it is actually publicly available on the on this website, and a very clear, specific scope, and even down to how many square meter of total floor area, and how many tons of carbon emission, setting very clear, specific goal in a prudent way that will actually help us to address the questions from investors who are very, very savvy with numbers, and so I think we need to be specific, and we would rather take a prudent approach rather than just a very generic, ambitious goal without specific. Yeah.
Thanks, Esther. We have reached the time allocated for this session, so I'm afraid we will have to stop here. But I think it is very clear, just based on our conversation, that there are so many things to talk about, and 40 minutes is really not enough, right? And I believe that you also have opportunities to catch our speakers on a one-on-one opportunity during networking. So please feel free to do that. But please join me in thanking Esther, Hardik, and Kristian for your time this morning. And I would also like to thank everyone for participating. Thank you, and hopefully we'll be able to continue the conversation in a different form the next time. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.